So, as how you doing, Evan?
Morning, Councilor.
Just for the sake of information, because the cameras are rolling, this is the committee meeting, standing committee meeting for economic development, downtown metropolitan planning. To my right, Second District Councilor Pat Hogan. To my left, Councilor at Large Tim Rudd. And if you would introduce yourself, please, sir.
Evan Helgeson, I'm with the Mayor's Office.
All right. So as the plan was created, as it relates to standing committees, there were a number of things discussed. One of the things discussed, and actually this is to the credit of the mayor, this idea came even before standing committees were created, that department heads would communicate to committee chairs any items that they would have coming on the agenda or not. And unfortunately, to date, we received no communication about whether there was any items or not. Because the plan was that if we received the call 24 hours prior that there were no items, then we wouldn't have a meeting scheduled. We would cancel the meeting. So I'm not sure if anybody dropped the ball on that end, but maybe you can provide some insight. And but even before that, well, I'll let you go.
Sure. And you may have seen it or may not, and I can share it with you. So there is a standard operating procedure for the executive departments on how they're supposed to engage with the council in terms of getting the letters to you. So under the SOP, it's the responsibility of the department heads to provide the committees, the entire committees, and the president of the council copies of the legislation before the standing committee meeting. This week we've had, I understand I was not here yesterday, but I understand there's some issues with the neighborhood and business the neighborhood committee meeting and this committee meeting, as you can see. So I addressed that with the department heads this morning in a meeting, and I will send them a follow-up email to make sure that that expectation is clearly set and that you are receiving your legislation prior to the meeting.
Appreciate that. And of course, if I could add to that, that they also let us know, if at all possible, 24 hours prior, so that we can get have enough time to get notice out that a standing committee meeting may be canceled. Because obviously there's no need for us to be sitting here talking to each other if there are no items. I don't know if there's anything in addition anyone has to add, or if there's any need for us to prolong this discussion.
Well, I'll add one thing. So I mentioned this, Councilor Rudd. So one of the challenges, and we are working through it, and I know it's accomplishable, but the challenge for us is, so our letters are due on Wednesday to the clerk. So in this week, for example, the letters come to the mayor's office on Friday. Monday was a holiday. Tuesday, we're working through them from a policy perspective and making sure they're prepared for the counselors. So we will, in the future, for holiday Mondays, we'll move the timeline back to make sure that we are providing this our first holiday Monday with the new standing committees. But so you understand the timeline, we are working to make sure that you have them in advance. And if there are not going to be any letters, that you know that ahead of time.
Well, that makes sense, obviously. We're adjusting, yes. Right. Right. That is the other issue, of course, is that they turn the cameras on at 11:30 sharp, and the people don't see anybody here.
Sure.
Or, I don't want to call out people walking in late, or they can catch people walking in late. So
that was the last thing I was going to mention. I do believe there's one item that will be before this committee on the next agenda. It's for CBDG. Jen, I'm looking at you, Jen. Is that correct?
For economic development?
My understanding from the clerk was that it would
coming
be
to
under
me.
economic development.
It's coming to me.
So, Jen, do you?
It's coming to you?
Yeah.
So, Jen, if you wouldn't mind providing an update. So I apologize. Again, the clerk and I are having a standing meeting on the Friday the letters are due to the mayor's office. We're going to review the legislation and make sure that we know which committees they're going to, because we don't always ahead of time.
Right.
And then we'll make sure it gets to you the following Monday, Tuesday, before your committees.
Now, for clarity, I believe we voted in a special meeting yesterday
Yes.
about the CDBG, but go ahead, Jen.
Yeah, so Jen Tift, Deputy Commissioner at MBD. So I think there are two related pieces of legislation, one that you, I think, addressed in yesterday's special meeting, and then the other one, which is really to approve our 5-year consolidated plan and the first action year of that 5-year period, which would be for program year 46. This is again for our ongoing entitlement grants with housing and urban development. So CDBG, home, Emergency Solutions Grant, ESG. There is a public hearing tonight that will be taking place that the department is hosting. And then I believe you all passed yesterday the legislation to advertise for your public hearing, which will be in a couple weeks. So we're in the process of public engagement to get comments back on the plan. At tonight's meeting, we'll be presenting the proposed budgets for each of those 3 entitlement programs. And that also includes very specifically which community organizations we're proposing to provide funding for. So we're going to continue to take comments, obviously, for the next several weeks. The plan has to be submitted to HUD on March 17th.
Right.
So that's the target we're aiming for.
Okay.
And happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, I'm not sure if my colleagues have any questions. Anybody?
Is the new 5-year plan, do we have it? I haven't read it.
You guys should have received it. I emailed it out on February 3rd. So we sent a link out to it. It's a very large plan, obviously. And I can resend that if that's easier, Councilor Rudd.
Yeah, I'll double check. If I don't have it, then I'll reach out. But
Okay.
anything, Ogie?
No, I just, even, I haven't, rather. I was just thinking that, so you're the guy who's just sort of bird dogs all the commissioners to make sure that they get any kind of legislation that they want us to consider to us?
I try to iron out the wrinkles in the process. That's the way I describe it.
Okay, you're the
Yes.
ironer outer then?
Yes.
And around.
But ultimately, it's the commissioner's responsibility to make sure the legislation is before the committee, but I will follow up to make sure that happens.
I mean, there's been times in the past that, and I commend the new council here for inaugurating this process, but there's been times in the past where some councilors, if they're not aware of an item or haven't had time to do a research of an item, they'll just hold that item for the
Right.
council meeting, so.
And our stated goal is to make sure that you have all the information you need and all your questions answered so that you can vote, have the opportunity to vote at the next regular meeting.
That's ideal, obviously. I was going to mention, Jen, obviously the item in your discussion is you guys are having your meeting tonight, and correct me if I'm wrong, this is obviously not something coming on, is it coming, you said there's an item, that this item comes on our next agenda?
So I think the
March
way,
4th.
my understanding from the clerk, and I wanted to clarify from your perspectives, is that he wanted our legislation introduced as kind of the backup or the support to the request for your public hearing. So we submitted it even though we don't need you all to vote on it, obviously, until it gets a little closer to the March 17th deadline. So I think my understanding is it will be on the agenda on the March 2nd meeting, but that it would be tabled at that time so that you guys can have your hearing. Mm-hmm. I need to confirm with the clerk the specific date. I think it's the 2nd or the 3rd that I think you guys were targeting for your public hearing. And so my thought would be that it will likely get voted on in full council on the 16th. So it will be on the agenda on the 2nd, but I think you would procedurally table it and then have your hearing, and then we'll vote after the hearing.
Yeah, I'm not sure if our,
I thought it was going to be like March 10th or something.
Yeah, because I don't think you guys will not have had your public hearing, obviously, by the time that the March 2nd meeting happens.
Right,
So,
right. Our public hearing, I believe, am I wrong to think the 12th?
Yeah, I know it was.
it could be. Yeah, the 16th is, I know, is a voting meeting, and I believe it's the week before that sometime, so we need to confirm it, but,
Right.
March 11th at 5 p.m.
okay,
Okay.
perfect.
On the 5-year plan,
Yeah.
is there anyone has the new director of neighborhood and business development started, and when does he start?
He has not. So Michael starts on the 2nd, which is Monday,
Okay.
a week from Monday.
So, is there a synopsis? Is there like a short? Because the way I understood we make these 5-year plans, then we stick to them for 5 years. So this is the year where we would change the allocation to the extent we want to do.
Well,
like,
so we do the
strategies.
allocations.
we do the allocations every year. And so the 5-year plan really lays out on a more strategic level our priorities related to community development. So you'll see when you
Different communities choose different approaches. To
right,
meet their
exactly. So
objectives.
we have set out 3 primary goals in the plan, which you'll see all around support for essentially housing, homeownership, and then community development programs. And essentially, it's the annual action plans. And so for this year, we have the first action plan for the next 5-year plan, which is for the program year that starts May 1st and goes through April of 2021. So that is where we actually propose the allocations. And then the allocations to specific community organizations get revisited every year.
Right.
So you'll vote on the allocations each and every year. And this year is just the first of that next 5-year.
But from
plan.
a strategy standpoint, I understand we approve the grantees, so to speak,
Right.
each year. But I also think if we set a strategy for the 5-year period, and then the changes within the 5-year period, I think would be less. You can change them however you want, but it seems they would be less than the change you may make in the when you change your 5-year plan.
Sure.
So is there anybody who would describe how the strategy has changed, if at all, from the previous 5-year plan to the new 5-year plan? I hear the focus on home
Yeah.
ownership, so I think that is different, but how?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've marginally, I think, shifted the strategy. Frankly, it's we obviously are working within the programmatic guidelines that HUD sets forth for the different entitlement funds. So we're not going to have a strategy that's radically departing from those program goals. That said, I think where we see a little bit of a shift is around yes, the focus on more homeownership, some of the infill strategies that we obviously want to promote become enabled by the next 5-year strategy in particular, because we think infill really is an important strategy for us from a housing and neighborhood development perspective. So you'll kind of see that shift. The other piece is kind of looking at the set of community development type programs outside of housing and homeownership. So for example, programs that support seniors and youth, programs that support homeless or those at risk of becoming homeless. That's kind of another category of supports that isn't about direct housing development, for example. So in the past, we've focused a little bit more, I think, on the senior population as an example. So you might have seen that in the last 5-year plan. That's emphasized a little less, frankly, this year, as we've been thinking about the prioritization of things. But generally speaking, there's still, kind of a primary focus on housing stability and home ownership, and then kind of the supporting wraparound services, in particular for the at-risk populations.
Okay.
I happen to like that idea, so I have nothing to say about that. Councilor Hogan, anything else?
No. Thank you,
Perfect.
Counselor.
If there's nothing else?
Okay, great. Thank you.
All right, nice and easy. Meeting adjourned.
Yeah. Thanks, Evan. Thanks, guys.